Welcome to Answers Unleashed, a talk show to help you reshape your brain with science and faith so you find the answers in front of you. Hi, I am Olympia LePoint, host of Answers Unleashed. Well, I am so excited. I am back here doing our talk show. It is our podcast show. We originally started years ago on the college campus, and through the pandemic, we transitioned, and now we've turned video. So we have a podcast for you, video now, no longer audio, but video, and it's filmed in Los Angeles. And I love bringing to you content, meaningful content, so you can make decisions. And this particular talk show is about how the pandemic has affected your brain. Now, that is a loaded topic, and we're gonna really break this down in the next few minutes, next 20 minutes, break down exactly how the pandemic is affecting how you think and how we all think, and what we can do to change the way in which we're thinking so we find answers. All right, I am thankful. If you know anything about my background, I am a rocket scientist and author. I've written a series of books, Mathophobia. I've written my latest book, Answers Unleashed 2, The Science of Attracting What You Want, and my second book here, which is the red cover, which started this particular podcast, Answers Unleashed, The Science of Unleashing Your Brain's Power. And I decided to write these books because I was not always successful. In fact, I suffered from fear, crippling fear, for almost my entire life. And I had to find a way to reprogram my thinking so I wasn't going to be strangled by fear. And I know that's a very violent word, but that's what happens when we experience fear. It does something to our brains. And I was so determined to change my situation and move from fear so I could create success for myself. I grew up in the poverty-filled areas of South Los Angeles, and it was a process to reprogram my brain. And in reprogramming my brain, I learned to overcome the fear of math, and I learned to eventually launch rockets into space. And that entire journey was challenging. What I chose to do is write these series of books to help people overcome what happens in the brain when we have experienced fear. And I know firsthand because I've had to reprogram my own brain to do it. And this morning, I remember I reached out to a really good friend, and I texted him, and I'm like, I wonder what's happening to our brain in the pandemic. And that's what actually made me decide to write this particular podcast, give you this particular podcast. And this podcast is a part of the answersunleashed.com website. And you can find more of these podcasts on answersunleashed.com. And this particular talk is how the pandemic affects your brain. How it affects your brain. It has affected all of our brains. It's not just you. It has been me. It has been every single person on the face of this planet. And the way the pandemic has affected us takes different forms in each one of us. And if we can identify how fear is strangling our abilities to move forward, we then can take the right answers, the right approach, to find a way to remove fear from us so we can move forward towards our life purpose and to create the solutions that the world is waiting for. All right, I know, let me take that off the screen. I know you're curious. You're wondering what on earth, what did I expect? Well, I figured out that there's three main ways that the fear from the pandemic has affected our brains. And I write about this in my book series. And the first concept is going to come from my first book, Mathophobia. And the way that the pandemic has affected all of us, is this way. Difficulty solving problems. Difficulty solving problems. In my first book, Mathophobia, How You Can Overcome Your Math Fears and Become a Rocket Scientist, I wrote about what happens when we experience fear, specifically when we're trying to solve a problem in mathematics. We turn into a couple of different people. We turn into, if we're really scared of mathematics, we turn into people who fear solving problems. And what happens first, before we turn into these people, is that we experience fear. Now, when we experience fear, there's something that happens in our brain. It is a gigantic neurological system of what happens in our brains when we experience fear. And what happens is that we experience fear in the reptilian part of the brain. I talk about this in my TED Talk, Reprogramming Your Brain to Overcome Fear. When we experience fear, we have the reptilian part of our brain firing. It is the connection between our brain and our nervous system and our spine. It's that reptilian part, and it's responsible for our freeze, flight, or fighting response when we experience fear. It is designed to help us survive whatever happens. But the problem happens in this situation when the fear turns on, the frontal brain lobes turn off. And in mathematics, when we have to solve problems, we have to use the frontal brain lobes in order to find solutions. There's no other way that we can solve math problems unless our frontal brain lobe is turned on. The fear and the frontal brain lobes are like an on and off switch. If fear is present, the frontal brain lobes that solves problems do not work at all. So when someone is experiencing fear in mathematics, they cannot solve problems. But this same type of problem solving transcends and is true in other areas of life, like the pandemic. If someone is not able to effectively handle the pandemic, the way in which they will see themselves affected by the pandemic is by not being able to solve problems easily. What are some examples? Okay, let's say you come into the house and you forget where your keys are placed because you're more concerned about making sure that you don't touch anything in your house that you just touched outside. See, that type of worry that you touch something outside and you're going to bring it inside into your house is the fear that is turning off your memory that allows you to know where you've just placed your keys. That's an example. Another example of this difficulty of problem solving is if you are trying to juggle two things at once and it just becomes overwhelming for you and it's just too much. Let's say you're a mom trying to help your child understand their math schoolwork on Zoom, and you're working remotely at home and you're asked to be in a meeting and your daughter asks you how to do a math problem and you're supposed to be in a meeting and you have to do two things at once and it's overwhelming and you feel like you're going to be burnt out. That's the sign that fear is stopping your frontal brain lobes from working to solve problems. In my Mathophobia book, I defined the ways that we can't solve problems and we become different people. The first person we become is Quincy the quitter. We'll quit before we even try. The next person who we become is Donna the overdoer. We'll try and do too much and miss the point and not solve the problem. We become Samuel the struggler. We think that we don't have the tools or the means to be able to solve a problem, so we feel inferior because we are not like other individuals. A perfect example is at the start of the pandemic when you saw people being able to go and get groceries, and some people had their grocery their refrigerators filled with groceries and other people didn't have groceries, and that caused a panic and fear. That's like Samuel the struggler type of thinking in the pandemic. The fourth type of person that has trouble solving problems is Crystal the criticizer. She'll point fingers and blame everyone for not being able to solve her problem. And this is the 4 different ways in which I figured out that when people have difficulty solving problems, it not only shows up in mathematics, it shows up in the rest of the world and in everyday life, because people take on these type of characters when they're stressed. Quincy the quitter won't even try. It's just too overwhelming. Quincy the quitter won't even try and research to find out what's happening with the pandemic. So he'll just quit. No, I'm just done with it. I will just done with it. And they'll pretend like the virus isn't out there. So you'll see these type of characters that will come up in a pandemic because it's tough for people to solve problems. Donna the overdoer would be somebody actually like myself who will clean every single thing before it's touched, and when they come back home, completely shower, do everything you can to completely clean and cleanse the situation, do all the air freshener and disinfectant in the air. That is the type of the responses in which people have had that falls into the Donna the overdoer category. And for Crystal the criticizer, that is a person in the pandemic who will point fingers. That person wasn't wearing their mask. That they need to be taken in. Or that vaccine, and they'll say something about the vaccine that's not true. And they'll blame certain situations outside of themselves. And these are all ways in which people are not handling the problem well. And it's a fear-based response that happens in the brain. And so I talk about that in my first book, Mathophobia, how you can overcome your math fears and become a rocket scientist. But it transcends not only into mathematics, but how we solve problems. And the pandemic is a huge global problem that everyone's trying to solve and be a part of the solution. And some people are not effectively solving the problem and turning it into these characters. The next type of way that the pandemic is affecting us is, let me put on my glasses here so I can show you, trouble seeing a positive future. Trouble seeing a positive future. Okay. And that concept comes from my second book, The Beautiful Red Color. If you haven't figured out, red is like my color. I love it. Answers Unleashed 2, the Answers Unleashed 2, the Science of Unleashing Your Brain's Power. And let me tell you about that book. And let me take this off here so you can see it. All right. I really got into the brain because in 2004, my mother went through a traumatic brain injury. She almost died and she had to go through brain surgery. And when people meet her and people talk to her, they have no clue that she's gone through that type of traumatic event. It was a traumatic brain injury. And there's all sorts of research that I had to do to help my mother regain basic function that we take for granted. Like when we walk and when we talk and when we write and when we sleep, that's different brain functions. And then when we solve problems, that's a particular brain function. And then when we see the future and envision what we want, that's a type of thinking that comes from the brain. And so in my particular situation with helping my mother, I realized that my situation of overcoming poverty was the way in which I overcame the chaos that I was in. And then my mother reprogramming her brain after her injury was the way in which she overcame the chaos of what she experienced. And I started realizing that each one of us has this ability to see the future, and it's a part of our thinking. It's a crucial part of our thinking that we need in order to not only get through tough situations, but thrive through them. If we cannot see the future that we want, we succumb to the situation that we are in. Woo, that was deep. I got to say that again. Well, maybe I can't, but I hope you rewind this particular video because what I just said was deep. It just came out and I'm like, whoa. If we are not able to envision the future that we want, if we're not able to do that, we are succumb to the situation at hand. So let me break down what happens in the brain when we are unable to see the future and envision what we want. Something really powerful happens when we can't become aware. Now, let me break this down. Becoming aware is when you are conscious of your present moment, conscious of your decision in this moment, and conscious that the decision that you have right now is going to map to where you want. That is consciousness. Becoming aware is being conscious that you have a decision in front of you and the decisions that you make maps to what you want. But if you can't see what you want, if you can't see the great future, then you succumb to the situation. For example, the pandemic is a terrible situation for everyone across the world. And what makes the situation worse is that there's variants. There's like alpha variant, there's the delta variant, there is like the Omicron variant, and then the sub-Omicron variant. I mean, you take your pick. And this is a natural thing that happens in biology. Viruses have variants. The more people that are affected, the more viruses that are spread, the greater chance mathematically that variants will develop. And science is always trying to keep up with the virus. And this is not just true with viruses. This happens with bacteria. This happens with all sorts of organisms. So in this pandemic, people are scared that we're never going to come out of it. And I must admit, I have that fear at times too. My mom, who's here with me, has to remind me, Olympia, this is only temporary. It's not going to be like this all the time. And so I have to consciously in my head keep thinking, this is temporary. The pandemic is not going to happen forever, but at the same time, it has completely changed the past. I can't, and the whole world can't go back to the way that we were before. We have to define a new way of being that is successful. So if a person is not being able to see a positive future, they will start thinking that this pandemic they're going to be crushed by the pandemic. They're not going to be able to come out of debt. They're not going to be able to find another job. They're not going to be able to socialize with their friends later. They're not going to be able to get the amount of sales or revenue because they can't interact with the same amount of people that they had before. They can't be booked for the same type of shows or performances because things are not happening in person. I mean, the list will go on and on, where that fear of what if turns into the worst case scenario. And that's how fear affects you in this situation. So Dr. Jeffrey Schwartz, he is just an amazing neuroscientist, and he specializes in neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is the ability for the brain to reshape itself from the inside out based on our thoughts and our decisions. What keeps our brain from reshaping is when we're experiencing such severe fear that we can't see our desired future. And what happens in the brain is this, and I'm coming back around to it, so I really can break this down for you so you have it. What happens in the brain is there's two parts of the brain uh, that really function together as a unit. It's the frontal brain lobes. We in the science world, the neuroscientists call that the executive mind. So the executive mind, which is the way in which we make decisions, are the frontal brain lobes. They're the same part of the mind that allows you to solve problems, like in the math and the science. So the frontal brain lobe is responsible for us making decisions. If you can imagine yourself driving a car, if you drive a steering wheel, you know how the steering wheel guides you to the right or to the left, or it guides you in different directions, and the steering wheel helps you move the car in the direction that you want. That's the role of your frontal brain lobes. It helps you move to the future that you want. All right. Now, you know how when you're in a car, you have an automatic gear and it goes into park, or it goes into neutral, or it goes into drive. You know how when you have a car and you put that particular car in a gear? Well, that gear that you have defines the rate at which you go. Parked is you're not going anywhere. Neutral is you can go in any direction. Drive is you're going in the direction in which you define by the steering wheel. So imagine your brain having the same type of function, and your brain's uh, automatic transmission is what we call the striatum. Scientists call that the striatum. It's what puts your brain in gear. So the striatum is like a part of your brain that is your automatic transmission, and it maps to the frontal part of the brain. So the automatic transmission in your brain is the striatum, and it maps to your frontal brain lobes, which is like the steering wheel. The problem is that when we experience severe fear, Dr. Jeffrey Schwartz was able to explain this in such a way that was brilliant. He described it like you're in a car. The car is moving, the car is in gear. But if you're scared, if you're in fear, the striatum and the frontal brain lobe disconnect. And it's the equivalent of you driving down the freeway without having a steering wheel. Get that. When we experience fear, the striatum and the frontal brain lobe do not connect, making you become aware. When they're disconnected, you will go on autopilot. You've heard that before, right? In Dr. Jeffrey Schwartz talks, he talks about when he went on autopilot, when he wasn't even realizing that what he was doing at the time. And so many of us go on autopilot. We become scared and we go on autopilot, and we don't even know that, oh my God, did that, like, for example, I know this has happened to somebody who's watching this. Have you ever gone to the refrigerator really stressed and you started eating something and you ate it all the way down, and then let's say it was like yogurt. You went over and opened up a container of yogurt and ate it, and you're like stressed about it, and then you look down and the yogurt's gone. That stress that you're experiencing stopped your striatum and your frontal brain lobe from connecting. Therefore, you didn't realize that you just ate an entire container of yogurt. That's the effect of how fear stops us from being able to see the future, and it stops us from being conscious of what we're doing at that present moment. If we're not conscious of what we're doing at that present moment, we can't make decisions to move towards what we want. That's deep, isn't it? I think it is. So that brings us to the third point. Here's the third point. It's hard to make decisions when you're experiencing fear in a pandemic. It's hard to make decisions when you're experiencing fear in a pandemic. Oh boy, I can talk and talk and talk about this for days. But I can't, so I decided to write a book about it. So this book, I can't with you right now. I don't think that you would want to hear a lecture for like 45 hours. So this is trying to put it into like a 20-minute time frame. But in this book, my latest book, Answers Unleashed 2, The Science of Attracting What You Want, I talk about the way we turn on our brain is by realizing we have decisions that we can make. And this is how deep it goes. The way we use our mind to make decisions is by activating the frontal brain lobes. This is the same part of the brain that is able to see your future. It is the same part of the brain that allows you to solve mathematical problems. When you make a decision, you turn on the frontal part of your brain and you turn off the fear. Isn't that something? And it's the same way when you decide to do a math problem, you turn on math or science, you turn on the decision-making function in your brain, you turn off the fear. That's why I really am such a supporter of the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics fields, is because when you experience the ability to solve problems in mathematics, you create opportunities for your frontal brain lobe to turn on. In my book, I talk about there's 6 different types of decisions that we make on a daily basis. We make decisions based on our faith and our life purpose. We make decisions based on our identity. Who are we? Like example, I'm a speaker, so my choice is to make videos in a pandemic so I can speak. That's my purpose. Everyone has different purposes. We make decisions based on our intent, how we plan to change situations. We also make decisions based on how we learn, how we use our resources, and how we interact with other people. And those decisions unlock opportunities for us. And as we learn to continuously overcome our fears, we do that by making decisions. When we make a decision, we turn the fear part in our brain off and it turns on the frontal brain lobes. When we make decisions on a regular basis, it is like rewiring our frontal brain lobes so we become effective decision makers and begin developing the executive mind. So with this, again, I'm going to recap here. The way in which you know that the pandemic is affecting you is when you have difficulty solving problems, when you have trouble seeing a positive future, and when it's hard for you to make decisions. So now I'm going to introduce to us some answers. Now, Answers Unleashed is about giving you answers, and this is now a video, so I don't have to just give you audio. I can actually give you like a video so you have this. So let's take a look here. Number 1, you can become solution oriented. That's the way that you break the problem, the first problem of difficulty solving problems. You become solution oriented. Now, let me break down what that means. Each one of the people that have difficulty solving problems, which is I'm just laughing to myself because I'm thinking I've been all these people before in my past. Quincy the Quitter. I've been Quincy so many times, and so many other people have been Quincy. This is like universal. Quincy the Quitter can become David the Determined. Once you realize that you're quitting before you even try, you can make a decision. No, I'm going to be determined until I actually get a resolution to this. I'm going to be David the Determined until I solve this issue. If you're Donna the overdoer and you try and still miss the mark, you can decide to become someone else, which is Sarah the strategist. And that's what I talk about in my first book. Sarah the strategist is someone who is able to see the big picture and see how her particular actions can meet the situation, so she finds the solutions that she needs. Samuel the struggler, who is someone who is just always thinking that he's always missing the boat and someone who is not as prepared as everyone else can become uh, Ivan the innovator. What he does is he uses his different way of thinking and his specific situation to figure out an innovative way of doing things. Like, for example, I was a speaker who traveled across the world on planes and uh, to go to technical forums to speak to 5,000 and 6,000 people in an audience. I mean, it was amazing. But when the pandemic happened, I had no way of doing that again. So I had to figure out what is a way in which I can still reach people. And that required me to become an innovator, figure out how to broadcast from my office. So it's a process of finding out the details of innovation. Like, for example, finding out the right camera equipment and finding the camera equipment that wasn't sold out at the time, and finding different camera equipment that I could use. Before I found this particular video system, I was found the app that on my cell phone that I could use my cell phone for video streaming. I had to find out the right Cat 6 cord to be able to connect my internet service. I had to upgrade my internet service so I could actually produce videos so it could be seen. I had to figure out the right laptop as well as the right audio equipment so I could be heard and seen at the right bit rate. I mean, these type of things in which you you have to become an innovator. And in my case, I was Samuel the struggler. I couldn't go to the places and talk, so I had to find another way to talk and still meet the need of reaching thousands of people on a daily basis or throughout an event. So when we experience these type of situations in a pandemic, we have to become solution oriented. If we are Crystal the criticizer and blaming everyone else, it's time to become Ellen the explorer. She will find out about all these different processes and actually look at herself as a person who explores what are the different ways that a solution can be found. Instead of me thinking someone or something is causing it, why don't I get in there and find out what's going on? That type of solution minded thinking is what allows you to rewire your brain out of a pandemic state of fear into a uh, innovative future type of thinking. And that allows you to become an innovative future thinker. All right. The second is choose to overcome chaos. Now, this is mapping with the trouble seeing a positive future. You have to choose to overcome the terrible things in which you're witnessing. I mean, all of us have witnessed horrible things. I mean, we've seen the Delta variant ravage different parts of India, and there was countless people that did not survive that pandemic. It was terrible. We saw the pandemic affect millions of people in China that first started. I mean, we've seen this horrible chaos of a pandemic, and there's no other way to describe a pandemic other than horrible chaos because lives are at stake. But at the same time, we have to choose to overcome this situation. And by overcoming it, the way you do that is by seeing the future that you want. Now, the future that if I just think to myself, the future that I would like to see, I don't know about you, but I would like to see a future where there are effective vaccines and the doctors know how the vaccines will work in different people. That's something which I would like to see. I would like to see effective vaccines and the doctors knowing how the vaccines will work in the different types of immune systems that people have, whether it be immunocompromised or even an elderly person or a really young person, because each person has a different type of immune system based on their age, based on their health history, and based on other factors. Something which I would love to see in the future is the ability for people to learn online, and for the large technical companies out there, you know who they are. If I say large tech companies, you immediately can call them out. I would like to see these large tech companies give electronic equipment to parents who need to be able to use multiple computers to get their kids online to learn in a pandemic, or be able to spread out class sizes so not everybody is packed in the same class. I would like to see options so parents are not forced to bring their children back to school when they're not ready, or parents are not forced to keep their children back home if they can't stay at home. I would like to see options for parents, and I'd like to see better options for education where there's equal opportunities for education through multiple platforms. And I would personally like to see the different groups of people across the world come together for finding solutions to be able to help people live. And that is, in this pandemic, it is about making sure people have housing. It is about making sure people have food. It is about making sure people have the right medical treatment, independent of your social status. So these are the things that I would like to see. Am I a humanitarian? Yes. Am I wanting to see the great things happen for people? Yes. But you have to decide that's what's going to happen. If it's just you bringing it in, that's great. There'll be people who will follow you, but you have to make a decision that this is what you want and move towards that. Because by seeing what you want and envisioning what you want in the future, you start creating that future, and it starts coming to you, and you'll have opportunities to build it. It's a chaos theory, mathematical type of really brilliant phenomenon that happens with our thinking. And it happens with us choosing to move towards the future that we want. And I talk about that heavily with mathematical proofs, as well as really brilliant stories in my second book, Answers Unleash: The Science of Unleashing Your Brain's Power. And the last answer I give is this, is make a decision a day. Make a decision a day. I'm going to say it again so you remember it. Make a decision a day. Watch, my voice is probably going to be in your sleep. Make a decision a day. Make a decision a day. You know how you do a sit-up, and your sit-up allows you to be able to become better with your ab movements? And let's say someone can't do a sit-up. There's different alternate ways of movement so you build your abdominal muscles. The way you build your frontal brain lobe muscles, because your brain is a muscle, you make a decision a day. Each day, make one decision. It doesn't even have to be a big decision. But the way you start activating your frontal brain lobes is that you make one decision a day. For example, it can be something very simple. I'll use my example. Over here to my left is my left. I'm not quite sure how you're looking at this, but it's to my left. There is a table filled with paper. The other day, I'm proud of myself. I made a decision to go through the paper and throw out what I didn't need. And I'm telling you, I'm not done. I'm still working on it. But the process of making a decision to throw out the papers did something major in my head. It turned on my frontal brain lobe, so I wasn't dreading the situation, but looking at how much space I could create for myself, how much freedom I could create. So the decision to remove papers triggered my decision to create more things that brought me joy. That may sound odd, but in order to start ushering in what you want in your life, you have to start activating your frontal lobe to make decisions so you can start seeing what you want and making decisions for it. The smallest decisions that you make adds up. Each decision counts. All right, so I hope that you remember all these tips. These tips are: 1, become solution-oriented; 2, choose to overcome chaos; and 3, make a decision a day. All right. I hope you have enjoyed this. I really hope you have enjoyed this. Visit answersunleashed.com and go to answersunleashed.com/podcast and find me under social media under Olympia LePoint. I am here with you now for 2022 every Wednesday doing a podcast, recurring podcast. We're now on season, I think it's season 8. I think it's season 8, or I gotta look at it. Season 8 or season 9. We've been on, but now we're on with video. And this podcast is to help you with finding the answers that are in front of you. I am Olympia LePoint, and I'll see you next time.